Hello, welcome to another episode of Montana Shares, your opportunity to find out about the nonprofits that make our state so great. I'm your host, Bill Crane, and today we have Kaia with NeighborWorks Montana. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So let's take the high view. What is NeighborWorks Montana?
NeighborWorks Montana is a statewide affordable housing organization. So we are based in Great Falls, but work all across the state with a number of different affordable housing strategies. NeighborWorks America is a federally, congressionally chartered organization, and we are an affiliate of NeighborWorks America. So NeighborWorks organizations do a number of different things, and I can explain that.
Let's dive in and go with some of the programs that you run.
Okay, great. So we really started with a strong focus about 20 years ago now on home ownership and really trying to focus on low income and moderate income folks and helping them get into home ownership. So the way that we do that is through education and counseling. So housing, education, and counseling is one of our core programs, helping people learn about home ownership and the process and what it takes. And then down payment assistance. So a lot of people can afford to pay their rent and pay their bills every month, but in order to save up that 20% down payment or even a 5% down payment can be a barrier to home ownership. So we run a loan fund. We're what's called a community development financial institution, which is just a fancy federal designation that means that we have a loan fund, and one of the ways that we work in communities is through loans. So down payment assistance can really help people get into home ownership.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so resident ownership is another thing you work on. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so resident ownership, in addition to home ownership and counseling and lending and a number of other things, we took an interest in about 10 years ago in manufactured housing. There's been a strong national growing focus on manufactured housing as an existing source of affordable housing that's already in our communities, and that's often overlooked. So there's a really great model called resident ownership that helps residents of manufactured home communities, which many people call trailer parks, form cooperatives and buy their land. So we now have 8 resident-owned communities in the state of Montana, and those are 8 out of about 200 across the country. So it's kind of a funky model that people have a little bit of a hard time wrapping their heads around, but it's a pretty amazing way for residents of these communities to become landowners.
Okay, so what's this look like if you're the park owner? You basically just sell the park to the residents?
Yeah, exactly. And so that's really always our first step, is to identify park owners who are interested in selling their land. And often we find that out just through the real estate listing. You know, we'll see a park has come for sale and we'll contact the owner and find out if it might be a viable project for resident ownership. So we're paying market rates, we're competing with any other buyer, but creating sort of the financing and technical support for residents to become the owners.
So if you're talking market price, I'm assuming that there's a challenge, and a lot of these trailer parks are in areas that people would love to build newer things onto.
Yeah. And there have been cases where, if a property is priced for redevelopment, that's going to be out of range for maintaining it as a park. But there are still a lot of parks in Montana that, are great properties and could continue as manufactured home communities for a long time, and those are typically the ones that have the best chance of becoming resident-owned.
Okay, so tell us what it looks like from the resident standpoint.
So it looks like me or one of my colleagues knocking on the resident's door and saying, your park is for sale and there's a potential that you and your neighbors could buy it. Come to a resident meeting and we can explain this to you more. And from there, the residents really decide whether they want to pursue this and learn more. So they're looking at all the real estate due diligence, just like any other land buyer, property buyer would, at the same time as they're building kind of this corporation together, electing a board of directors out of the residents of the community, building their governance structure and their financial structure, and then working with us to sort of build the skills that they're going to need in order to manage that park long term.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds a little daunting. Does it end up not really being that bad once they get going?
It can be a lot of work, but generally, residents are really excited to have that opportunity. I mean, often when we first knock on people's doors, they say, "Oh, I don't have any money to put into this. I don't have good credit. There's no way I'm going to qualify for the $1 million loan it's going to take to buy this property." But once they understand that this is a whole structure and that they buy it with their neighbors, and that those barriers have really been addressed, people are generally really excited about that opportunity, because residents of manufactured home communities typically own their home, but they don't own the land, and so it creates a really unstable form of home ownership where lot rents can increase to unaffordable rates. Sometimes there are issues with deferred maintenance. The road maybe doesn't get plowed or maintained in the way that the residents might need, in some properties, not all. And then also there's the risk of redevelopment. So, for folks who own their home and are always kind of looking over their shoulder to see what's going to happen to this property, the idea that they could own it and have that stability is really appealing, despite that, or maybe, and then the work that goes into it can be a positive for folks as well, because there's a lot of leadership development opportunity, and people really do get to know their neighbors. It becomes a community in a way that maybe it wasn't before.
So just to dive in a little deeper, I assume that you formed this entity, a cooperative, and that they would still pay rent to the cooperative, and then sort of that is used to pay off probably a loan that was used to acquire the property.
Yeah.
And eventually it will probably start yielding benefits for them.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And so let's see here. Tell us about the situation here in Helena as far as manufactured homes goes.
Yeah, so there are about 25 manufactured home communities in Helena, and I think that sometimes the numbers of parks and the number of homes surprise people, because in Montana, about 14% of all of the houses are manufactured homes, and of those, about 35% are in manufactured home communities. And I think once you start to recognize that, you start to see them everywhere.
Yes.
Yeah, so in Helena, there are 25 parks. Some of those are very small. I mean, they could be 3 homes, but at least 50% of those are larger than 25 homes in one place. So it's over 1,700 homes in the Helena area that are in this situation. And we don't have any resident-owned communities in Helena yet, but it's something that we've looked at and would love to make happen here.
Do you get proactive about this, or do residents of existing parks actually just see if they can buy them without them being on the market?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have had kind of every which way you can think of for a project to come to us. It's happened where a resident contacts us and then contacts the landowner. That's not as typical, because we really need to be working with the landowner and have a willing seller. That's pretty critical to this working,
yes.
right? And we want this to be beneficial for all parties, so we always want to be working with the property owner. But we've had property owners call us directly and say, "Hey, I've heard about this. I think it'd be a great opportunity. I've worked with these residents for decades. I've owned this community and have a relationship, and I need a return on this investment, but I would love to see it to continue as a park." So we've seen that, and we've also had situations where there have been parks that have just been listed for sale and gone through a realtor, and they were looking for any investor buyer, and it just happened that the residents were able to be competitive. So,
Okay.
yeah.
The thing that I was stumbling on earlier was I was curious about, does it typically turn out to be quite beneficial to the residents to buy the park? Does their rent space go down? Is that the best way to word that question?
Yeah, no, you're right. So they do continue to pay lot rent because they need to maintain the park. They need to have income to plow the roads and trim the trees, and then also pay the loan. But really the strong benefit are, first and foremost, that they have stability of land ownership, right? That they're not going to get kicked out. And then the rents typically stabilize. So after 3 to 5 years, the rents in a resident-owned community are typically below the market rents for the area for any other park. And that's because the residents are managing just to maintain the community. They're not trying to turn a profit. They're just trying to break even. And so, once they've kind of got the debt that they've started to pay off and they get their feet under them, it maintains affordability long term. And then beyond that, I think there's some real great additional benefits, like they have control over the infrastructure, so they can make the improvements that are relevant to their quality of life and to their property. And then we often see a greater investment in individual homes, because once they have the stability of the land under them, there's just much more opportunity and incentive and reason to then invest in the home, because they know they're not going to have to leave it behind if the park's being redeveloped. They just can, fix that roof or build a deck or do landscaping. And so there's a lot of that pride and ownership that grows naturally out of just that underlying ownership structure.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is sort of me geeking out a little bit.
Yeah.
So you have the stability, but there's still people that need to move. And
Yes.
And so now they own a piece of this. How does it work as far as sort of buying and selling in and out of the cooperative?
So they are buying a membership share, and then when they leave, they get that reimbursed to them, and they just move and either sell their home or take their home with them. So actually for them, in terms of the transaction of moving in and out, it doesn't look that different from what it looks like right now with an investor-owned park. They still have that flexibility.
And is the cooperative trying to then sell the next occupant that share in the cooperative?
Yes. So once someone moves out, whoever moves in has to become a member of the co-op.
Okay.
And so over time, it will be 100% owner-occupied homes and 100% co-op participants. And then, at that point, you have, much more kind of activity and buy-in and participation, and that's really the long-term goal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds great. It's interesting, something I knew nothing about, really.
Yeah, it's a different model.
Okay. Any parting thoughts you want to leave us with?
I encourage folks to learn more about all these different affordable housing approaches. I know that it's a big topic in many of our communities, and there are some really great approaches that we hope can be available statewide.
I know it's challenging for people to get into home ownership at any level, anywhere.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate the work that you do at all the levels that you work at to help people get into homes. It's a satisfying place to be.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it makes an impact.
Great. Well, thanks for being on the show today.
Thanks.
And as always, thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.